Hello, everybody. Michael Tracy here. So, yesterday evening, Thursday evening, a flurry of news stories surfaced purporting that there was an effort underway within the Department of Justice to apprehend Julian Assange, arrest Assange, or indict him. And I just want to parse some of the reporting here because I think it's pretty important. So, as far as I can glean, the first report came from CNN. Jim Sciutto of CNN tweeted yesterday at 3 p.m. Pacific that the U.S. authorities have, quote, prepared charges to seek the arrest of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. And he attributes that, of course, to U.S. officials, which can always mean just about anything. Note in the wording of that tweet, though, and if it sounds trivial to be parsing the wording of tweets, in this case it actually is pretty consequential. So if you look at how that tweet was worded, it says that charges are being prepared, not that charges are about to be filed, not that charges are ready to be filed, but just that there's a preparation process underway. And then if you look at how CBS News reported it, and they also attribute this to anonymous U.S. sources, of course. They use the phraseology, the Justice Department is considering charges against WikiLeaks and its founder, Julian Assange. So it's considering charges. Now, this seems to derive from a draft of potential charges that are being considered within the DOJ and which could conceivably be levied, but which have not yet been levied. And I think that's an important distinction because the Obama administration contemplated levying similar charges, but abandoned that prospect when it concluded that it couldn't conceivably indict Assange and not also chill media in the United States or stifle press freedom because there's no tangible distinction between Assange acting as a journalistic entity and what United States sources outlets do all the time, meaning publish classified material, and even in some cases coordinate with sources to obtain classified material, often illegally. So if you were to criminalize WikiLeaks doing that, you would then criminalize any number of media outlets which have done similarly in the past and in the future. In the future. So I don't think it's correct to now just suppose that there is a criminal process that's imminent in to apprehend Assange and charge him criminally, because simultaneously, seemingly, so many media outlets were notified as to this potential criminal process. It seems pretty plausible that there was a coordinated PR effort undertaken by whomever in the Justice Department might be overseeing this effort. And maybe, conceivably, it was simply a bluff. It was simply a way to demonstrate how hard and on leaks the Justice Department is and how unwilling to tolerate leaking of material the new Sessions-led Justice Department will be, that they don't actually intend to pursue this any further. I think that is conceivable. At the same time, given that they are apparently in the process of drafting some kind of new criminal charge, there is definite possibility that this could actually be acted upon. But I wouldn't necessarily take this to mean that Assange is under imminent threat of apprehension. So, but that aside, even them doing this PR initiative, if that's what it is stifling in its own right because it's basically saber rattling on the part of the Justice Department, and even if it doesn't actually result in formal charges, it chills journalism along these lines because there's a risk now, as articulated and promulgated by the Justice Department, that that this could subject people to subject journalists to criminalization or criminal punishment. So so again, just to restate that, whether or not this culminates in formal charges being levied, it's still stifling in its own right for the lead law enforcement authority of the United States to be making threats along these lines and to even be raising the prospect that criminal sanction could result from what are essentially acts of journalism. So you could see other people, maybe other journalists or people in the media, in a position to do journalism similar to what WikiLeaks is now being threatened with criminal prosecution for, opting not to go down that route because they don't want to incur the wrath of the Justice Department, or they at least don't have the resources to combat Justice Department threats. And also, just on a practical level, I mean, Assange is housed, as I think people are aware, in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. And he's there because he receives immunity and safe harbor as a result of being in that diplomatic location or domicile. So the idea that the United States could simply invade, perhaps with the cooperation of the UK government, that embassy and violate all international law and at least international custom with respect to the sanctity of these diplomatic residences, that would be extreme even by the standards of the United States in terms of the lengths they've gone to apprehend suspects. And people were actually closely watching the Ecuadorian elections that took place a few weeks ago now, because the left-wing candidate had pledged to continue granting Assange asylum in that embassy, while the right-wing candidate pledged to cut off that asylum, and the left-wing candidate did win by a narrow margin. So presumably that would continue in the foreseeable future, and there would be no change, at least on the Ecuadorian side. So I think there's a decent chance, like I said, that this is just some sort of bluster on Trump's part, damaging bluster for sure, but not necessarily something that's going to result in tangible criminal processes. At the same time, has anyone heard any prominent Democrats raise concerns about what this could imply for the protection of press freedoms in the United States? Because, again, the reason why the Obama administration abandoned this idea to prosecute WikiLeaks is because they rightly concluded that it couldn't be done without also criminalizing U.S. media outlets in the journalistic processes that they carry out basically every day in publishing classified material or material that the government doesn't want to have circulated. My question is, if Democrats are so horrified, as they have repeatedly stated, about Trump's threats against the media and about the potential curtailment of press freedoms in the United States, why are they so muted about the adverse consequences of this potential prosecution? Well, it should be pretty obvious. For purely opportunistic and short-term cynical political reasons, Democrats and liberals in Congress, in the Hillary Clinton orbit, in the liberal media sphere, have relentlessly maligned WikiLeaks since last summer because WikiLeaks was publishing material that they perceived as being inimical to their political interests. So simply because they were upset about that, they made WikiLeaks out to be this enemy, and they concocted theories about WikiLeaks being a foreign intelligence service that was being used by the Russian state to facilitate this wide-ranging conspiracy to install Trump into power. I mean, that's basically the canard that's been churned out by every prominent liberal media organ in the country for going on 9 months. So now Democratic partisans and people who are just, rank and file liberal types have an extraordinarily negative view of WikiLeaks. So therefore, if you don't believe that WikiLeaks is in any sense performing a journalistic function, if you believe that they're purely Russian spies or Russian agents or some kind of front for a hostile Russian state, then you might well conclude that prosecuting them is warranted, because then they're not due any kind of press protections. They should be treated as an espionage outfit rather than a journalistic outfit. So given that logic, you would expect Democrats and liberals to be cheering and celebrating this threatened prosecution. And that's extraordinarily dangerous. But it goes to show how short-sighted and myopic their anti-WikiLeaks rhetoric was for the past number of months. They were simply so aggrieved by them daring to release information on Hillary Clinton and other Democrats that they whipped up a frenzy about how horrible WikiLeaks was and how it wasn't committing true acts of journalism, and it was just a hostile intelligence service. And that's basically what was echoed by Mike Pompeo, the new CIA director, last week. What he said was perfectly in line with what Democrats and liberals have been saying for months, and now this seems to have resulted in charges potentially being leveled against WikiLeaks. So, there might be some people out there who would recognize, or some liberals or some people who have been vociferously against WikiLeaks, to recognize the adverse consequences that this could have for press freedoms more widely if the prosecution were actually carried out. But they don't really have a standing to object, because they, in their rhetoric, in their actions, in the propaganda that they have been propagating, they've demonized WikiLeaks and created a domestic political environment whereby Trump had to distance himself from WikiLeaks after going around and declaring how much he loved it, and using material derived from WikiLeaks to campaign on. What's happening now is basically Democrats and Trump are in harmony on this issue. Or if not Trump, factions within the Trump administration, because as far as I know, Trump himself hasn't come and actually said anything negative about WikiLeaks thus far. Although he did tweet shortly after the inauguration something hostile about Chelsea Manning. But so those are just some implications to be cognizant of, I think. And keep a close eye on the story, see what results from it. And that'll do it for now. So have a good night.